right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the next session. So this is kind of a continuation of the previous session, but it also has some new stuff that will be fun to look at. So for today's speaker, we have Danny Banks. He is a principal design technologist at AWS on the Amplify team, and he has over 10 years of experience at AWS. Today he'll be talking about, very similar to the previous session, building a full stack Gen AI app with AWS Amplify. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Danny.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and excited to talk to you all. Like you said, this is kind of a continuation on the previous talk. We'll talk about similar things. We'll talk about kind of somewhat different things, but in the same light. But to get started, I kind of want to talk about myself and my role at AWS and Amplify a little bit. So I'm a design technologist, which many people might not know what that type of person does. But I kind of operate at the intersection of design, and technology, technologist. But really kind of what I see my role as is trying to build things that empower other people to build and ship great experiences. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with AWS Amplify as well. And that's actually why I came to work at Amplify 3 years ago. It really kind of aligned with my core values of what I am passionate about and what I like to do. I think that kind of Amplify empowers people like me who aren't cloud experts. I don't know a lot about IAM roles and policies and signing requests and how to connect services to each other. I started out as a designer and then I kind of moved into being sort of like a front-end engineer / designer. So I'm very familiar with front-end technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, Vue, but I don't know a lot about cloud services and how to build like cloud applications. And luckily, with Amplify, I don't have to be a cloud expert. I can just say, hey, I need an application with auth and data, and Amplify will set up Cognito with the right user pool and identity pool and IAM roles for each of those things and signing the requests when I talk to AppSync, and it just kind of handles all that for me. And so kind of, I like to think about AWS Amplify as like the full stack framework for AWS. Mo kind of mentioned it as well. And I think it's kind of, again, empowering people to build applications, web applications or native applications with AWS and using native AWS services under the hood, not a complete abstraction that abstracts away the actual underlying services. And when I was kind of writing this talk about Amplify and building like full stack AI applications, I kind of came to this like realization and almost like an underlying core value that I kind of just realized is very important to me, which is that developer experience, how we kind of interact with the code and libraries and tools that we build with, really kind of unlocks user experiences. And we kind of heard this a little bit in the keynote, how kind of we're really at the cusp of this kind of new revolution or new generation of building things, like who can build, what can we build, and how can we build it. And so hopefully, I actually didn't know what Adam and Antje were going to talk about, but it actually kind of fits very well with what I'm going to be talking about in this talk. And I really kind of how I like to think about it is that a lot of times there aren't like technical constraints to doing something really, but just developer experience constraints, like how the developer experience shapes the way we think about our problems. And there's this, quote, I forgot the person that said, but like, we shape our tools and our tools shape us, kind of. And so I want to talk a little bit about how kind of the tools that we're building at AWS and Amplify are hopefully shaping the way that other people build with those tools. And to start, I kind of want to go all the way back. Does anyone know what the name of the first ever chatbot was? or in the Computer History Museum. Anyone? Eliza, that is correct. Eliza. Eliza was a very simple computer program built in the 60s, I believe. And it was actually pretty revolutionary. So it was a very simple program in that it kind of tried to mimic human language. So you would write something and it would respond. And it was pretty simplistic in that, like, you know, it would just kind of ask questions to prompt you to keep talking to it. But people that used it really thought that they were like talking to something that was intelligent. They actually thought that like they were talking to something that was understanding them, even though it was a very simple, like, you know, pattern matching and like replacement program of kind of asking you about the things that you're talking about. And coincidentally, my daughter's name is Eliza. I did not name her after the chatbot. My partner probably wouldn't have liked that, but she is a chatbot in that she talks a lot. And she doesn't stop talking. So it's a pretty fitting name for her. And so I kind of wanted to bring this up because, again, in Adam and Antia's talk, they talked about the kind of being at the cusp of newer experiences for AI. And again, I want to preface, this is not AI by any stretch of the imagination. Like, this is a simple computer program that you could have just written yourself in 100 lines of code. But you know, a lot of the experiences that we have seen so far with what we're calling like AI is basically this. It's text in and text out. It's single, you know, you send a message, it sends a message back to you. It's just text-based. And flash forward to now, this is Claude.ai, and you know, is this a whole lot different than Eliza was? I mean, it can definitely do more complex things, but the actual interface of this is still just text. You write it something and it responds with something. Obviously, what it's doing is, you know, infinitely more complex. Can actually like respond in more complex reasoning and thoughts, but it still has a lot of limitations today, and it's still, again, mostly just text in, text out. I'm going to kind of gloss over the fact that a lot of the models now will do, you can add images as input and it will respond in text, or things can generate images, but very basically it's still kind of text in and text out. And kind of towards the end of this talk, I'll get to how we can kind of improve on these experiences based on the developer experiences that we're trying to build. But it's still just a text-based chat. But I think that we are kind of at the start of something. And again, Antia and Adam kind of talked about being at the cusp of a new generation of how we build things. And the way I kind of see it is that AI is in its serverless era. But I think we're just kind of scratching the surface of what this means. You know, Bedrock, AWS Bedrock as a service is a serverless service. You can just send a request and get a response. You don't need to worry about provisioning, you know, complex inference, running servers, and all that type of stuff. You don't need to worry about training models necessarily. You can just grab a foundation model like Claude 3 Haiku or Meta's Llama or Stability AI and just send a request to it. You don't even need to provision anything. And I think that this is a huge like step change in kind of building AI and ML features, because you know, now I don't need to worry about training my own models. I don't need to worry about running costly inference servers and scaling those servers. I can just, you know, send an API request and get generated AI content back. And I think, you know, that, you know, even so, you know, I think we're kind of getting to, I think we're still at a very early stage of what this could mean, but I think we've kind of hit this very critical piece of where serverless kind of really took off, is driving the cost to zero. So I can just build an application, a serverless application, and if no one uses it, I don't pay any money. Like, If no one hits my Lambda, I'm not paying any money. If I were to build an application before this, I would need to get web hosting or a web server, and it would need to be running, and it would cost a certain amount of dollars per month. I'd also need to worry about keeping it updated and security updates and stuff like that. But so driving the cost to zero, I don't need to worry about spinning up servers and remembering that they're running. And then also the speed at which I can make changes and even prototype or test changes has, like, I guess the speed has gone up, but the iteration time has dropped down almost to zero as well. So minimizing the time to iteration and hypothesis testing and getting something real in the hands of customers. Mo kind of showed as well, like being able to deploy with Amplify. You can get a website with a URL that you can just send people running in, under 10 minutes probably. You can just clone a GitHub repo, add it as an Amplify application, and you have an application running, and you have a URL you can give people. And I think that was kind of like the huge breakthrough in serverless, and that is the kind of breakthrough that we're just starting to see with like AI and ML services, is really getting that iteration time to zero and that cost to zero. And just kind of like how serverless paved the way for full stack development, being able to build an entire application in a single code base, in a single language, with things like Next.js. Foundation models and services like Bedrock are paving the way for the next era of what we can build. But the LLMs themselves, the foundation models, are really just like one part of building like an AI experience. To make anything meaningful, we need more than just a UI over an LLM. We need other services and other data like data, storage, and auth. Excuse me. And this is where Amplify comes in. And kind of at the core of this talk is how to bring AI into the application layer, how we can make the developer experience of that kind of shape the way of things that we can build. And so let's take a look at what the architecture of a full stack AI application kind of looks like. And so this will go into a little bit more detail. This is a pretty simplistic overview, but even so, there's like almost 10 or so services. I'm even leaving some stuff out of here, like IAM as well. But at the very core, kind of starting with the front end, you have like something to build. You have some static assets, JavaScript, CSS, images. You need to store those in something like S3. You need to put those in front of a CDN like CloudFront. You need Certificate Manager to kind of sign and authorize requests. You need Route 53 to handle DNS. And that's just for the front end. And then for the back end, for authentication, you would need something like Cognito. And then you need something like AppSync as an API layer to authorize a request who can access what data. You need to store that data in something like DynamoDB. And finally, the last piece is using something like Bedrock. Luckily, as kind of Mo mentioned in the previous talk, Amplify can handle the front end. So just point a Git repo that is a front end application. So React, Next.js, Vue, Angular, any of those things. And then, again, as kind of Mo showed, Amplify handles the back end as well. You can just kind of have your Amplify folder and say, I have an auth resource that uses email to log in. I have a data resource, and data uses AppSync and Dynamo, and I just have these data models, like I have a recipe or a to-do, or you can define complex relationships, like I have users, and users have posts, and posts have comments, and comments have users, and stuff like that. And so we'll kind of use this infrastructure, and again, this is all coming from a single Git repository to define both the backend and front end. And not only that, as Mo kind of mentioned, one of my favorite parts of Amplify as well is the sandbox experience. So you can just run npx ampx sandbox and deploy at least all of the backend piece to a per developer cloud sandbox. The front end will be running locally, so if you have like a Next.js application, it'll run Next.js locally. but you'll actually have cloud backend resources like a Cognito user pool, an AppSync API, all that stuff actually running in AWS. And you can be making tweaks, and it will watch your Amplify folder so that if you make a change you add a data model or something, it will actually update your AppSync API and your DynamoDB tables like immediately, so you can just instantly refresh your local web server and everything is already there in the cloud. So like really love that feature. And so getting back to kind of the idea of like how we build, I think things are starting to shift a little bit by what it means to be like an AI developer, because now we can write the front end with TypeScript. I'm a huge fan of TypeScript. You can also write JavaScript, but if you're writing a front end application, it needs to be some sort of JavaScript-based language. But I really love TypeScript. I think it's awesome. The back end, you can also write in TypeScript. With our kind of back-end functions, you can just write a TypeScript file. Don't need to worry about compiling it or anything like that to compile down to JavaScript that actually gets deployed to a Lambda. You just write a TypeScript file and use our kind of function construct and point it to there. Infrastructure, because as Mo showed, that is also TypeScript-based. So you can say, here's my auth resource, here's my data resource, here's my storage, all built on top of CDK, so it's all TypeScript-based. And AI, believe it or not, also TypeScript. You can just write TypeScript code to handle AI functionality. I can't put like memes in slides or whatever, but there's that meme of Fred Armisen in Parks and Rec where he's like the Venezuelan diplomat, and he's like talking about things that can get you sent to jail in Venezuela. And he's like, overcooked chicken, jail. Undercooked fish, jail. This, believe it or not, also jail. So I wanted to put that as like a meme up here, but I can't really put memes. But everything can be written in TypeScript, which I love. You can have a single code base, all in TypeScript, and handle everything. And I think this is kind of really like the huge jump in developer experience that will hopefully see a huge change in the types of things that we can build. And I really think that's why the CEO of Vercel, Guillermo Rauch, said that the AI engineer of the future is a TypeScript engineer. He's been doing a bunch of really great talks that are kind of similar to this one as well. He kind of talks about this idea of like software 1.0 versus software 2.0, and how we kind of build applications in the old and new ways of building applications. Thank you. And I would really agree with him. I think this is kind of the step change function, the step function change in developer experience that is really going to kind of usher in a new wave of user experiences that we can build. And so now, I as a non-ML data scientist, machine learning AI person can get started building AI experiences and not worry about training models, both the cost and the time, hosting those models and running inference servers and handling all of the ML ops and that type of stuff. I can just grab a foundation model, add some functionality on top of it, add some nice UI, give it some data, add some storage, and I have a full AI application. And I really think again, we're only just scratching the surface. This is very new and I think we're just at the beginning. And hopefully this kind of new developer experience will kind of unlock those things. Bringing AI closer to the front end, I think we can kind of think about the things that we can build a lot quicker and easier versus having to spend months thinking about, okay, here's the training set of data that we need to train this model and create this model, and then only then can we build a user experience on top of that. But now we can kind of think about the user experience we want to build and work backwards and see how we can actually enable that using generative AI and using AWS Bedrock. And this is kind of a silly little demo I built a while ago. It seems a little quaint to me now, but this is, again, just a chatbot. It's text in. The one thing that kind of the innovative thing here is It has access to all the data that I have access to defined in my Amplify backend. And once it actually gets data, it can return UI rather than just text. It can say, okay, I'm looking for a rental listing that has a memory foam mattress because I have a bad back, and here are two memory foam mattress, or here are two listings with memory foam mattresses. It both searched the data for memory foam mattress, but also just mattresses in general, and then found these two results and then said, hey, I want to display these two results in UI components rather than just text like, here's an ID of something. And I think this is just a very, very light step in the direction. I think kind of where we're going with embedded AI experiences, I think we'll be breaking out of the chatbot paradigm a lot and having more embedded AI experiences and kind of normal, or not normal, but traditional GUI-like interfaces. And again, I built this, this is kind of before what we have built for the Amplify AI RFC, but this was kind of the impetus or start of where we kind of built that from. And so with Amplify and Bedrock, I was able to easily build and prototype this experience without much AI knowledge or even AWS knowledge of how to hook all these things together. And again, like as Mo kind of said previously, you can do all this stuff today. This is a docs page that we have for kind of how to do this today. It goes over basically kind of what Mo said, using Amazon Bedrock as a data source, defining a custom query, querying that query in the front end, and stuff like that. So this is all possible today, and what we've been kind of working on is how to make that developer experience a lot better. And so as we've kind of seen, Bedrock, launch and kind of evolve, we noticed this pattern evolving, or kind of this pattern starting, of people using something like AppSync as an API layer and authorization layer, and then connecting that either to a Lambda and then to Bedrock or to Bedrock directly. And we kind of saw this pattern emerging of generative AI, as data. You can think of, calling a generative AI model like Claude as just calling a database, but rather than returning static, deterministic results or deterministic data, it's returning generative data, it's returning probabilistic data rather than just static data. And so that was kind of a big aha moment for us, is kind of how we build the developer experience for enabling generative AI applications, is thinking of it just as data. So Amplify has a data construct. You can define data models and custom queries. And so that's kind of how we approached building the generative AI capabilities within Amplify. And so Mo showed a sneak peek as well. I'll show you a sneak peek. And so it really starts with your data schema. So Mo, I think this is almost exactly the same as what Mo showed. So I won't spend a whole lot of time here because you might have already seen this, but again, you have a backend data schema. You can have a generation. We think of generation and conversation routes as separate. So a generation, you'll have arguments and returns, and you'll define a model. You want to use the Claude 3 Haiku model. You can change that to any model that works in Bedrock. And this basically just works like a custom query in AppSync. And so you can just say, generate a recipe. You'll have to give it a description, which is a string, and it will return this custom type, which is a name, ingredients, and instructions. And again, authorization as well. You can say only authenticated people can hit this API, or you can say, this is public and it just uses a public API key, whatever you need. And then my code is slightly different than Mo's, but very similar. So one thing I do want to point out here is one of the benefits of Amplify as well, especially with the data construct, is you have end-to-end type safety. So if you use AI generation React hook, you'll get this autocomplete, so only generate recipe is the value that you can use here, because I only have a single generate recipe generation route. If I had multiple, then you would be able to get autocomplete and type checking for this use AI generation input. And then you'd also get type safety for this generate recipe function that's returning. So it knows that based on this definition, it takes a description, which is a string. And then in here, we have a description, which I'm just setting as a React state as a string, so there's no type errors here. So I think this is really, really powerful. And then, similarly, there's just a text field and, button. If you click it, will run the generate recipe function. And the other piece I want to talk about a little bit that I don't think Mo covered was we also have an idea of a conversation route. So this is more of a traditional chat-based interaction. You have a user message and an assistant message. Again, you define your AI model. This could be any AI model in Bedrock, your system prompt. And then this is where it gets kind of interesting is you can give it tools, which tools are kind of a newer AI concept of giving the LLM access to things that it wouldn't normally have access to. Like LLMs are trained on a static set of data. And so if you ask it, what's the weather? It'll be like, I am a AI model. I don't know what the weather is. But if you give it a tool that says, hey, you can invoke this tool called getWeather, and this tool provides the current weather for a given city, and this tool takes in a city, which is a string. If you give it that same query of what's the weather in San Jose, it'll actually say okay, I have this getWeather tool and they're asking about the weather in San Jose. I'm gonna try to invoke the getWeather tool with San Jose as the input. And so we kind of think about tools basically as part of your data schema as well. So getWeather is just a custom query. You can also just call getWeather in your client application, just like your LLM model would. And then the other piece I want to show here is you can also give it access to data models. And the really kind of important thing that we did here is the caller identity is maintained through the call stack. So if we have this authorization rule of allow owner, so only the person that created the record has access to that record. So you don't get, if 3 different people are using my app, you don't get to-dos from every single person. You only get to-dos that you created. And so if I ask it to list the to-dos, it will know that I'm asking it to list the to-dos, and it will send kind of that authorization through to query the to-dos. So it'll only return the to-dos that I myself have created. I think this is something that a lot of people have struggled kind of building these type of tools with LLMs because the disconnect between where you're defining your data and where you're actually kind of invoking the tool that the LLM is trying to call is very separate. But we kind of made them in the same data construct. And so I think that's really important. And then kind of the last piece that we did is UI components. So having and again, I think chatbots will eventually mostly phase out, but I think right now chatbots are still fine. So we have an AI conversation chatbot React component. And the other thing that we did is you can pass in component React components that the LLM can respond with. So it can know that hey, I have this weather component that's used to display the weather, and it takes in these props. And so then if it gets a query what's the weather, it will first query to get the weather, and then it'll say, I want to render the weather component with this information. And then that's how you get actual rich chatbot UI conversation components. And so I think this is really powerful. And again, this kind of brings me back to my underlying hypothesis that I kind of figured out as writing this talk is that hopefully the developer experiences that we're working on at AWS and Amplify are unlocking new user experiences for people to build. And that is kind of really what gets me up in the morning is kind of doing those things. And so that is the end of my talk. I don't have as many QR codes as Mo did, but I do have the RFC for Amplify AI and for the Amplify documentation site. Amplify documentation site will also have links to like our Discord and GitHub, as well as a bunch of other useful information. And I am dbanks design on all social media and GitHub platforms and stuff. Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone, let's give it up for Danny over here for that fantastic talk. So do we have time for a Q&A? Yeah, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. The reason that we do this is we have a camera in the back, so in the recording, they'll be able to hear your questions. So yeah, if you have any questions, raise your hand right now. I'll come to you. Don't be shy.
How does this work with a web application, like smartphones, right? Web apps, mobile apps. How do you integrate mobile apps with Amplify?
Yeah, so same way, it's just that instead of the front end being kind of built and deployed by Amplify, you'd still just have like if you have a native Swift or Android application, you'd still be able to use like the Amplify CLI to generate basically like a configuration file to pass into, like we have a Swift client, an Android client, Flutter client as well. So you could still provision the backend with Amplify, and then just in your native code, you would configure Amplify to talk to your resources. Does that make sense?
Does it do the same TypeScript?
No. So, I guess it depends on your application. If you have a React Native application, then you could use TypeScript as well. And we have some UI components for React Native. If obviously you're writing a Flutter app that's in Dart, or if you're writing a Swift application, you're writing Swift. So it really kind of depends on what you're trying to write. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Just a small question. So you demoed about the AI components and the React like hooks and everything. So is there like a documentation and is it available to use right now, or is it's still in progress?
So the documentation right now is in the RFC. We're working on like actual like full documentation right now, but everything to get started should be in the RFC for using kind of the new UI components and React hooks. You can also just find me throughout the day as well if you want to just ask me a question.
Yeah, feel free to go ask him questions before we break for lunch. But before we do, let's give one more round of applause for this excellent talk.